Good morning. My name's Randy Sykes. Today I'm here to do a quick presentation on the video that I did in 2015. There were a few papers I left out, thinking it might be best for everybody, but it's time to bring them in because nothing is changing. 51 years, Lyme disease has been ravaging lives, and the CDC is not bending, they're not changing. So first thing, before you watch this video, this may be the first time you've seen the one from 2015. When you hear the word conspiracy, most people, the first thing that jumps into their head is theory. If it's a conspiracy, it also has to be a theory. Not so. You have the real conspiracy theory with Lyme disease is that the CDC, Center for Deceit and Corruption, is saying Lyme's cured in 10 to 14 days, or maybe 30 days in extreme cases. There's not one published paper anywhere you can find that will show that Lyme is cured with 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. You have no test. The test is 14% accurate. And this goes on and on. The people getting sick, they get 3 weeks of antibiotics. And well, you can't have Lyme anymore, it's cured. And they go into MS, lupus, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, even dementia. There's even papers on dementia. So a friend of mine, I had a $20,000 reward back in 10, 15 years ago. He put a new one out. It's a $25,000 Lyme challenge. If any doctor can prove that Lyme is cured with 6 weeks of any antibiotic you want to use, he'll pay you 25 grand if you can prove that. This is hoping the doctors will stop saying it's cured after 10 to 14 days. So, first thing I want to get into, a paper that I left out, and I do apologize, I just didn't want to push the envelope too much. The funding for Lyme disease was 1970. You'll see this one clip in my old video. 1970, the Department of Defense, approved by the Congress, basically like a job. They hired people to do this. They put up $10 million. And the goal was to create a totally new synthetic biowarfare agent, an agent that does not naturally exist and for which no natural immunity could ever be acquired to. And the question was, this is interesting work, are we doing it? When he said, no, we're not, he says, why? Is it lack of interest? He says, certainly not, it was lack of money. So they did agree to give $10 million for it. Now, the problem with that, it was 1970. The next paper that you will see will be scanned in is 1997, the Canadian Biosafety, working with a lab in the United States, published a paper. This paper was done, it was a worksheet on Borrelia burgdorferi. That's the Lyme disease bacteria, the disease that causes the Lyme disease. And they took this paper and published it in 1997. The Lyme disease bacteria was identified in 1982, but they were working with it. And Section 6, you'll see it on the article, Section 6 says laboratory acquired hazards. 45 infected workers in the lab. Now, you know these guys were very cautious. You don't want to end up getting sick when you're working with this stuff. They wear masks and all the safety equipment. So 45 workers got infected. So it shows that Lyme disease can be easily transferred to the humans. So 45 infected workers, 2 people died during this program. 2 deaths, so Lyme can be deadly, which it is. Just sometimes takes too long when you get sick. And the last one is, they were working with it and they ended their study in 1976. Now the problem with that is, Lyme disease appeared in Connecticut in 1975. They had, in New York too, they called it Montauk knee in New York. And the arthritis, children were coming down with Lyme arthritis. They played at the ferry dock that went out to Plum Island. I'm not even gonna touch Plum Island. I don't care, where it came from, whatever, it's here. So the kids were getting Lyme arthritis and swollen knee and Lyme arthritis. Well, it was working in the lab, and the paper that's on the screen now. It was working in the lab and they ended their study a year after it popped up in Connecticut. So that's the whole problem behind it. And the CDC test, you'll see on the very beginning of the show, will miss 86% of the positive cases. The CDC had a meeting, a Dearborn meeting, and they wanted all the people with Lyme tests to come together. The best test of the day was Imogen Labs, 91% accurate. The CDC picked the worst test possible, the one that scored the lowest, 14% accurate. And I go through this during the video. I go through, you'll learn about that. IgM is 59% accurate. CDC says don't pay attention to that. But anybody that has Lyme disease, even if you get 1 or 2 bands, look on your slip. Quest Labs, on the bottom of the test for Lyme, it says a negative test does not rule out an active infection of Lyme. The test is useless. They also have, most people have band 41. Band 41 is the flagellum, the tail of the spirochete. It picks up in the blood work. And you can see the little guys wiggling around. Well, it picks up the tail, and that's band 41. Most everybody that has Lyme, 99% of them I would say, may not test positive. You may have 1 or 2 bands, but you'll have that band 41 in there if you've got, that it means you have either syphilis or Lyme disease. So this is what they've been doing to us. And they won't bend. They don't seem to care. There's a guy who runs around attacking, mostly women, worked for the CDC, NIH. He goes by the name Charles, or Chucky. And he's done some horrible things to people, just attacking, slander online. So I'm thinking, if this video helps you, just spread it out, share it. 51 years this has been going on, think about that. And most of the Lyme groups don't want to get into this stuff because they think it's conspiracy theories. When you see a document and you read the document, it's a conspiracy, not a theory. I hope you guys enjoy the show, and thank you so much. You'll see that I'm a little bit sharper in this video than I was in 2015. The infection level in my brain was so high, but I'm a little bit quicker. Physically, I'm shot, but my brain works. Thanks, and enjoy the movie now. Bye-bye. Hi, my name is Randy Sykes. This morning I'm here to do a presentation on Lyme disease, the problems involved, including testing, misdiagnosis, and just basically the whole cover-up, the reason this Lyme disease is being covered up and the truth never gets anywhere. We're going to start off with the Dearborn meeting, Second National Conference on Serologic Diagnosis of Lyme Disease. In there, the CDC wanted to know who had the best test. And Imogen Labs came, as you can see on your TV, Imogen Lab came in at 91%. 91% accuracy. The worst test of the day was the CDC Western blot, which they chose and are still using to this day. The CDC G-blot, IgG bands came in at 14% accuracy. That means 86% of the people that get tested for Lyme that have Lyme will test negative. Now you notice above that, the IgM blot is 59% accurate. That would be roughly 60% accuracy. But that's not going to happen because on the bottom of this page, they say the clinical and public health implications of these findings will be discussed. Now, the IgM being 59% accurate, the CDC issued a statement. A positive IgM test alone is not recommended in determining active Lyme disease in a person. So here's another reason why too many people are going to be testing negative on this, because the current test is 14% accurate. Now here's the test, antigens of Borrelia recognized during Lyme disease. And it says here, this is by Alan Steer, and late in the illness during arthritis, a new IgM response sometimes develops to 34 kD, a component of the organism. The appearance of new IgM responses, so this is showing that you can reproduce IgM bands as a new infection because they're replicating. Then we have an email from Dr. Steer. This was Freedom of Information that Chris Newby had received. And in here, he's talking about the biggest discrepancy. This is to the CDC. The biggest discrepancy in the IgM testing, the frequency of positive results in every category is less in your testing, less than the CDC's testing, than ours. I think that the particular problem is that it relates to early dissemination of neurologic, cardiac, and arthritic infection. So he's saying in their testing that the CDC's testing wasn't as sensitive as his, and if you go to the bottom of the page, he's suggesting that they should use his results and not the CDC's, because it'll make the CDC's test look worse than it actually wants to be. So he's saying in here again, the problem with the IgM is it's showing neurological, cardiac, and arthritic infection. Why would that be a problem when you want to see if somebody is sick? This is the next one on your screen will be the FDA meeting. This was, again, talking about the testing. The ones that failed to mount a vigorous immune response tended to do worse clinically. So there was an adverse correlation between the degree of serologic response and the outcome. So individuals with a poor immune response tend to have worse disease. What he's saying there is the people that did not test positive. If you have Lyme and you don't test positive, you're the sickest of all because your body cannot produce the antibodies. Now, keep in mind that the test is 14% accurate for Lyme disease, which isn't very good. The CDC came up with another idea to make it even worse. You're lucky if you get maybe 7, 8, 10% accuracy, because the CDC also has an ELISA test. The ELISA test is a test that's preliminary. You do that test. If it comes back negative, you don't have Lyme. If it comes back positive, you still don't have Lyme. A positive ELISA allows the doctor to run the Western blot. So if the ELISA was 50% accurate, only 50% of the people are ever going to get to the Western blot. So you could be approximately 7 to 10% accuracy. This is why the CDC says that 90% of the people get a bullseye rash, because that's the only way they recognize the disease. Here's another FDA paper on your screen, and this is from Steer also. It's the usual response to respond to antibiotics whenever you treat it, although it may be more difficult later. You may have to treat longer. And neurological disease requires intravenous antibiotic therapy. And another doctor asked him, Lyme disease is sort of like syphilis. Alan Steer, it's just like syphilis, but if a person already has deficit, particularly a neurological deficit, it usually improves but may not become totally normal. So this is basically, they're talking now about chronic Lyme. Now, these papers are going to be a little bit more upsetting. I read this one. This is Department of Defense Appropriations for 1970. And on the next page in, it says there are two things about the biological agent field I would like to mention. One, the possibility of technological surprise. Molecular biology is a field that is advancing very rapidly, and immunobiologists believe that within a period of 5 to 10 years, it would be possible to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist, and for which no natural immunity could have been acquired to. Now, the problem with this, they're shooting for a new biowarfare agent to come out within 5 to 10 years. 5 years would be Lyme disease, 10 years would be AIDS. If you follow further down on the page, within the next 5 to 10 years, approximately 5 years, at a total of $10 million, they could make this through the National Academy of Science. Now, to show how I can't even put it into words, how ridiculous this is, now they're talking, on the next page in this congressional hearing, they're talking about getting rid of stocks of nerve agents, biowarfare agents. These are bombs from World War I, World War II, Korean War, and the early part of the Vietnam War. They keep advancing on aircraft, so they don't have any planes to carry these bombs, even missiles. So they're talking about, on page 129 at the bottom, they're talking about transporting to a deep ocean disposal. And you go to page 130, the deep ocean disposal, they talk about what they have to get rid of. We have roughly 27,000 tons of chemical biological agents, 27,000 tons that they dumped in the ocean. That's scary. Now here's something that, this one relates a little bit more to infectious diseases. Biological testing involving human subjects by the Department of Defense. This was a subcommittee of Human Resources. And in the bottom of the next page, it's hard to read this one, it's kind of faint. They're talking about biological warfare agents. And the part that's underlined, the initial capacity for producing bacterial agents was later expanded to capabilities for providing, as I turn the page, providing toxins in addition to viral and rickettsial agents and the unique capacity for growing and infecting mosquitoes. They've done unbelievable amounts of work in this area. The next one is a PubMed document. It's artificial feeding of ticks for the study of transmission of disease agents. I have probably 100 papers on this alone. There's so much I can put into this show, but there's tons of stuff out there. Go into PubMed and do your own research. You'll be shocked at what you find. Here's another one that fits right in. This is infectious. I can't put this on the screen because I could not get permission. It'll be on a couple of the websites that'll be listed during the show. The infectious agent is Borrelia burgdorferi. It explains all about it. You go to section 6. This is key. Section 6, laboratory-acquired infections. 45 reported cases up to 1976 with 2 deaths. This tells us 3 very important things. First of all, 45 workers were infected in the lab. So it's pretty easy to get. The CDC says Lyme disease is almost impossible to get. You could roll around naked in the woods and you might get bit. So 45 people were sick, infected in the lab. They worked with it up to 1976, which means it appeared in Connecticut in 1975. So they were working with it in this lab in 1975, 1974, we don't know. With 2 deaths. So it tells you Lyme disease can be deadly. It's easy to get. They were working with it when it mysteriously popped up, and it can cause death. I have death certificates and a whole bunch of papers at home on that. But this one is United States Patent Office. And this is an invention, the pathogenic Mycoplasma fermentans incognitus. Now this one is patented by the Department of Defense. Many people say that this is what the Gulf War illness, that's what these guys are suffering from, because they all have the In fact, 70% of any chronic illness in the world, I guess, has the Mycoplasma infection. If you're chronic, whether it's MS, lupus, Parkinson's, whatever. The next page is a PubMed article. Another strain of Mycoplasma was made. This was made from everybody's favorite island, Plum Island. And it's highlighted. You'll see that on your TV. Plum Island worked with mycoplasmas. They worked with infecting ticks. They've done everything you could imagine. This one I may not be able to put on the screen, but it'll be on the website. This is UTSA, $10.6 million lab. They're going to be working with biowarfare agents. They'll be working with such diseases as anthrax, tularemia, cholera, Lyme disease, desert fever, and other parasitic and fungal diseases. Now, Lyme disease is listed with some of the most deadly pathogens known to man. Another one, the CSU, biological warfare, says some season will call what they're working with spooky microbes, infectious bugs, and weaponized biological agents. Among them, anthrax, SARS, avian influenza, tularemia, encephalitis, West Nile virus, Lyme disease, chronic wasting disease, plague, yellow fever. It just goes on. So what's the attraction with this Lyme disease if they tell you it's a cakewalk, it's so easy to get, so easy to cure, I'm sorry. Now, this is New England Journal of Medicine. They wouldn't even respond to me. But I have a paper here, The Long-Term Course of Lyme Arthritis in Children. The natural history of Lyme disease is not completely known. We studied the long-term course of Lyme arthritis in 46 children in whom the onset of disease occurred between 76 and 79, who received no antibiotic therapy for at least the first 4 years of the illness. Now, they're using the excuse that they didn't have a test, they didn't know what it was at that time. But the lab, I just showed you the lab they were working with, knew about it in 1975, 74, whatever. Down below, it says all 46 children had positive IgG antibody responses to Borrelia burgdorferi throughout the illness. So that's the Lyme bacteria. They tested positive for it. And later on, the people got sick, later on lingering, they had IgM responses. Were significantly higher than the IgG titers. Another reason why the CDC doesn't want to use the IgM. You can Google, I won't put this on the screen, you can Google this one. This is the Tuskegee timeline. Go into Google, type in Tuskegee timeline. This is an experiment that the CDC did on the black Tuskegee soldiers. This went from 1932, ended in 1972. And the experiment ended when they died. When they died, the experiment was done. And when this came out, the news media finally caught on to it. Now that we're talking about Plum Island and experiments and whatever, the next thing on your screen is a paper from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were investigating a man named Eric Traub. Eric Traub had bought some land in Maryland. He was putting fuel tanks in, underground fuel tanks. I believe he had a generator. And if you read this, they were concerned that this guy was working to help overthrow the United States government. They felt that he was ready to help if there was an invasion into this country, that you would have fuel and radio and whatever they needed on this farm. So the next page, FBI, they're talking about, excuse me, they again installed more gas tanks, underground tanks. Subjects reported to have built a large home near the Frank DuPont estate, which has an airport. So they were concerned about that. The next page is, they're talking about Eric Traub being extremely pro-Nazi. So here's a guy that they were afraid was going to overthrow the United States government. The FBI, CIA were watching him because he's extremely pro-Nazi. Here's the papers that they brought him into the country to work at Plum Island. His job there was, one of the main things he did was infecting ticks. So this is the requisition to get him from Germany to the United States. Keep in mind, this is a guy that they're afraid is going to overthrow our government. They put him in charge of biowarfare on Plum Island. The next one is his photo. The National Defense Program, his photo, and his fingerprints when they brought him into the country. This is interesting. As you can see on your screen, I posted a $20,000 reward in 2003, I think. I canceled it. I pulled it in 2006, 2007. But it was interesting to see the emails that were generated. Again, thank you, Chris Newby, for the Freedom of Information emails that she filed, which took 5.5 years for her to get them. They had to censor everything. And in there, they're talking about the $20,000 reward. They were upset with me because I posted a reward. The only reason I did that was hoping the news media would say there's got to be something going on here. This guy's putting up 20 grand saying Lyme is not easy to cure. And I was really hoping the news media would do something, but they didn't. That was a big failure. So Hank Fader, we demanded that Hank Fader show us the test that they used to diagnose Lyme to say that Lyme is cured. That's why we were out there. We wanted him to come up with come up with a sign. I'm sorry, my brain's a little tired. They wanted him to come up with a sign, paper, document, whatever, explaining that Lyme is easy to cure. See what they're using, because we've already proven the Western blot is nothing. So this is from Phil Baker about the $20,000 reward and the protest at UConn. Why not take this as an opportunity to challenge them to provide unequivocal evidence to show those who believe that they have late chronic Lyme actually have a persistent Borrelia infection. Well, Phil, does it really matter if you have a persistent infection or chronic Lyme? That's like calling somebody a chronic alcoholic or a drunk. You still have an infection and you don't have a test to prove it. So you can't use the word chronic Lyme is not real. Here's one from Henry Fader from UConn. I think the key is to not debate the chronic Lyme disease science with the patient. We cannot prove the patient does not have chronic Lyme disease. So he's admitted we have no test. This is from Derlin Fish. This is a good one. This is how you treat your taxpayers. The battle cannot be won on a scientific front. Derlin Fish is admitting they don't have the science. We have the science proving that Lyme is not easy to cure. There's no test for it. The battle cannot be won on a scientific front. We need to mount a socio-political offensive, but we're outnumbered and outgunned. We need reinforcements from outside the field. That's a nice way to treat the people that are paying taxes. And this one is also from Alan Steer. There's one point that I would like to emphasize in untreated patients. He means people that weren't treated immediately, which is 80–90% of the people, because your doctor can't see a positive test, you don't get treated. Alan Steer says, there is a chronic form of Lyme disease that commonly results in Lyme arthritis or in rare cases, Lyme encephalitis, Lyme, neurological Lyme. I won't put these on. These were censored. There was absolutely nothing in these. These emails didn't have anything because they decided we weren't smart enough to read it.
The next person to talk to us, Dr. Phillips, if you could go now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to comment specifically on the persistence of Lyme bacteria in patients who've been treated. Certainly there are many aspects of Lyme disease which remain highly controversial, and diagnosis and treatment are among the top two. The fact of the matter is that many patients with Lyme disease will relapse despite antibiotic therapy, and some call this a post-Lyme syndrome or post-Lyme fibromyalgia, whereas others call this kind of nonsense, and it's just a continuation of the initial active Lyme disease. A couple of very conservative authors, including Dr. Steer and Siegel, have evaluated patients with so-called post-Lyme fibromyalgia. Their data was very interesting, but their conclusions were surprising. They found that with antibiotic therapy, the patients initially worsened, then they improved, and then off antibiotics, they relapsed again. It should be noted that a temporary worsening of symptoms with initial antibiotic therapy is typical of active Lyme disease rather than a post-infectious syndrome. This is consistent with a Herxheimer reaction. Their conclusion was that benefits attributable to antibiotic therapy in these studies were placebo effect, but it should also be noted that these studies were not placebo-controlled. And lastly, it should be noted that every one of the primary symptoms associated with fibromyalgia is also common in active Lyme disease. So it should come as no surprise that Bieberdorferite DNA has been detected actually in the muscles of patients with so-called post-Lyme fibromyalgia, demonstrating persistence of the organism. And in animal models, despite 30 days of amoxicillin or doxycycline, eradication of the organism was not achieved. When they've expanded these studies to include not only amoxicillin and doxycycline, but also azithromycin and intravenous ceftriaxone at comparable human dosages for 30 days, the same thing happened. The bacteria was not eliminated from these animals. However, they did note the episodes of acute arthritis, of objective swelling, did resolve. In this study, again by conservative authors, including Drs. Persing and Steer, a full 30% of the patients remained persistently PCR positive despite multiple courses of quote-unquote adequate antibiotic therapy. When I use the term adequate or appropriate, I am specifically referring to shorter courses of antibiotics, generally in the 4-week range. Their conclusion was that Lyme arthritis that persists after antibiotic treatment is due to persistence of the spirochete. In this study, a whopping 74% were still PCR positive despite antibiotic therapy. With most other infectious diseases that I know of, PCR reactivity equates with chronic infection, but Lyme has been held to this higher standard, this other standard. So we'll go a step further. Here we have human persistent infection despite antibiotics proven by the presence of B. burgdorferi. Here they found it in the skin despite extensive antibiotics in a seronegative patient. When I use the term extensive, I'm referring to more than 4 weeks of antibiotic therapy. And here again they found it in the eye despite intravenous antibiotics. And here found in the blood and spinal fluid of multiple patients who are both seronegative and spinal fluid Lyme antibody negative. Here they found it in the heart in a fatal case of Lyme disease from Lyme carditis despite quote-unquote adequate antibiotic therapy, which was clearly inadequate in this case. Here, despite several courses of adequate oral and intravenous antibiotics, this patient also succumbed to Lyme disease, and her lymph nodes demonstrated B. burgdorferi on autopsy. Here they found it in the joints, despite, quote, adequate antibiotic therapy, both oral and intravenous, also by conservative authors, including Schoen and Stier. Here again, they found it in the spleen despite intravenous antibiotics. And here again in the joints, despite antibiotics. And here, despite 7 years of multiple trials of antibiotic therapy, Lyme arthritis persisted and spirochetes were documented in the synovium and synovial fluid. So, with PCR data, with histopathology specimens, which demonstrate the persistence of the organism, that should be enough to prove chronic infection in chronic Lyme disease patients. But again, Lyme has been held to this other standard where isolation of the live bacteria is what's been required. And that's been accomplished, as difficult as it has been to culture B. burgdorferi from patients with disseminated disease. Here they cultured it alive from the skin in early Lyme disease, which most people think is easily treatable, and this was despite antibiotic therapy. Here again, cultured from the synovial fluid, despite antibiotic therapy. Here cultured alive from spinal fluid, despite intravenous antibiotics, which clearly achieve high levels of bactericidal antibiotic levels in the spinal fluid. Here they have multiple cases presented whereby the bacteria was cultured alive from the eye and the spinal fluid, despite antibiotics in seronegative patients. Here multiple cases were presented again. Another study, despite antibiotic therapy, cultured alive from the skin and spinal fluid in seronegative patients. Here again, cultured alive from the blood, despite extensive antibiotics in seronegative patients. And here again, cultured alive from the spinal fluid, despite antibiotics in seronegative patients. And I include this study because this patient was initially Lyme serology positive and then went negative despite progression of the disease. And the bacteria was cultured alive from the ligaments despite oral and intravenous antibiotic therapy. And I use it as a stepping stone to say, well, you know, how useful are serologies in following the progression or lack of progression of the disease? They don't seem to be all that useful at all. And in this study of, again, conservative authors from Westchester, found that 68% of patients became seronegative after antibiotics, yet 62% of these patients were persistently symptomatic. And here again, multiple cases were presented, B. burgdorferi cultured alive from the mitral valve of the heart, skin, and joints, despite oral and intravenous antibiotics in seronegative patients. And here again, cultured alive from 91% of patients, despite being seronegative in 94%, and despite having had 6 weeks minimum intravenous antibiotic therapy in all. So how does this affect, treatment durations? Well, in this study, they had found that after 2 months of treatment, roughly 1/3 of the patient's conditions improved, and after 3 months of treatment, almost 2/3 of the patient's conditions significantly improved. The results here, I quote, they say this support the use of longer courses of treatment in the management of patients with chronic Lyme disease. In this study, they say that several aspects of late borreliosis, meaning late Lyme, are false negative antibody testing and the need for prolonged antibiotic treatment in chronic or recurrent forms. And here I present another unfortunate fatal case of Lyme disease, and I present this one because it was expressed primarily by neuropsychiatric features with a progressive frontal lobe dementia. Here the author stated that antibiotic treatment resulted in transient improvement, but the patient relapsed after the antibiotics were stopped. And their conclusion is that Lyme disease must be considered even in cases with purely psychiatric presentation, and prolonged antibiotic therapy may be necessary. So, having said all this, what's the true standard of care? In a Lyme endemic area, 78 physicians were anonymously surveyed and published in this peer-reviewed medical journal. And these were not Lyme doctors, they were general doctors. They found that 50% of the responders believed that 25% or more of patients who have Lyme disease were seronegative, and that for post-erythema migrans Lyme disease, interpreted as acute disseminated Lyme. 43% of the responders treat 3 months or more. And for chronic Lyme disease, 57% of responders treat it for 3 months or more. So the majority of general doctors in a Lyme endemic area in this published study were treating for more than 3 months for patients with chronic or refractory forms of Lyme disease. In summary, I'd say that there are numerous medical studies that demonstrate that chronic Lyme is caused by chronic infection. Seronegative Lyme disease is common, and longer antibiotic treatment durations are more effective than shorter, although not necessarily curative. Post-Lyme syndrome, post-Lyme fibromyalgia is really just persistence of the initial infection. It's a internally inconsistent and unscientific theory that should never have seen the light of day, and that curative therapies are needed for chronic Lyme, but this research is not really being done, and there is a denial of the high frequency and even the very existence of chronic Lyme disease by many researchers. And that concludes my 10-minute presentation. And if there's question and answer, I can address some of the other things that were said earlier.
I'm sure there will be.
Okay.
With respect, I would like to make an observation that many of these papers are written by the same authors. And I would not like the lay people in the audience to get the impression that this is a series of perhaps 24 papers written by 24 different groups or individuals. And I think that you will have to agree with me, sir, that many of the authors are the same in many of the papers.
I actually would not agree. We can go over them right now. I don't agree. If you
well,
like,
I noticed Dr. Danta's name is there several times. Let's go over them. Perhaps I've misread them.
Dressler, Steer, Persing. That's the first one. Okay. Second one, we have Bear, Zhang, Bear. That's the second one. Different, clearly. Here we have Liegner, Shapiro, Ramsey, Halperin. I mean, okay, clearly different. Meyer, Blatz, Gau, Spenker, Weidman, all different authors. Hanger, Halinska, Daskel, Gabuski, Hankova, Horacek, Vizluvzil, and Hablasova. Different authors. Where I don't see actually one similarity yet, sir. Reimers,
why don't we go through
DeKoning.
the whole group?
Yeah, of course, but you made a statement which I'm replying to. Reimers, DeKoning, Newbert, Priek, Mersick, Koster, Mueller, Felber, Pongratz, and DeRay. Kirsch, Rubin, Steer, DeRay, Winkelstein, and Norden. Schoen, Aversa, Ron, and Steer. Semino, Azzolini, Tobias, Pesce. How many do you want me to go through?
I'd like to see the whole group.
Okay, Hulinska, Votipka.
Now, Halinska's appeared before.
Yes.
Is that not correct?
She has, and so has Steer. And let me just say, Dr. Linska is a very well-published article,
I'm
researcher.
not saying that. I'm just saying.
just-
let's
very
continue. Perhaps
respectful.
I've misinterpreted the results.
Okay. Badafrano, Combs, Enzenauer, Fitzpatrick. I don't remember those names before. Sturl, Priek, Mersick, who had appeared before. Chimperman, Rosick, and Masbaron and Jarab. I don't recall those. Schmindy, Hunziger, Musli, and Schab.
I believe Hunziker appeared someplace earlier on, but
This is
I won't argue
absurd.
the point. Go ahead.
What about Steer?
It's not even that. You know, there are researchers who have published multiple times in the field. It's not uncommon to see them in 1 or 2 publications. We're not.
I'll
quoting.
stop my.
We're gonna do.
That's just an absurd comment. I mean, you know, I can go down the whole list if you want me to.
Let me just say, since we're somewhat pressed for time, is your presentation, Dr. Phillip, in written form? In other words, can we make it part of the record? 'Cause
Yeah,
that
there are
will-
several things that you can make part of the record.
Great.
And because I was limited by time, I will give
I
you
appreciate that.
something that also documents persistence of infections, actually 71 references by many different authors. Also, I would include, Dr. Zemmel very accurately referred to a Klempner study, which had shown that there wasn't a demonstrable benefit to retreatment in patients with chronic Lyme. The International Lyme Associated Disease Society has a position paper on that. I'm the lead author. It's 16 pages long. That study, in my view, is highly flawed, and we critique that. And also, the ILADS has just been published, their new treatment guidelines for the management of Lyme disease. It's just been published in the peer-reviewed journal Expert Review of Anti-Infective Therapy, and it's hot off the presses, and I will also include that as well.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on. I just want the audience to to get an idea that they're not all moving in the same place.
Thank you very much.
Now, I've got a few papers here. Two of these, I figured, I took stacks, hundreds of papers I kicked out because you can only put so much in. I want to do one of everything. This is a PubMed. A 66-year-old man developed fevers, chills, lesions on his skin, left eye sag, and he was hospitalized. He ended up having cardiac issues and died. They did an autopsy, they found spirochetes, and he had Lyme treatment, a short course. So that's one. And I'm sorry, my brain's not working well lately. Here's another one where they did a study on mice, and they did an autopsy or whatever you do on animals, and the extended results, previous studies, the ceftriaxone, indicating that antibiotic treatment is unable to clear persisting spirochetes, which remain viable and infectious but are non-dividing or slowly dividing. So here again we have another case of treatment failure, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, my father died from dementia 10, 12 years ago, and he was covered with ticks. We're down in Rhode Island. He must have had 200 ticks on him. And at that time, just brush them off. They can't hurt you. So I kind of wanted to put something in for dementia too. This was a guy, he was expressed clinically progressive frontal lobe dementia. In other words, Alzheimer's was setting in. By the way, when you have neurological Lyme, many of the people get the infection in the frontal lobe, and it can, change your personality, cause depression, all kinds of stuff. So he had frontal lobe dementia. Antibiotic treatment resulted in transient improvement, but the patient relapsed after the antibiotic stopped. Why didn't anybody give him more antibiotics? The patient died. And there's many of these studies where in fact, there's I won't mention his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but he's doing research. He's taking cadaver brains from Harvard, people that died from Alzheimer's. He is now getting 100% positive for Borrelia spirochetes.
The spirochete that causes Lyme disease is Borrelia burgdorferi and related Borrelia. The model that I have used to try to understand all of the possible things that Lyme disease can do is the syphilis model. Stokes, Modern Clinical Syphilology, 1945, W.B. Saunders publisher. It gets into every organ system of the body, and there are chapters on manifestations in the skin, manifestations in dead babies, manifestations in the bone, manifestations in the brain, and particularly dementia, because dementia and syphilis was general paresis, and general paresis is as close as you could come to a carbon copy of Alzheimer's disease. The diseases are exactly the same. If a spirochete syphilis could cause dementia, why couldn't the Borrelia spirochete, over a long period of time, cause Alzheimer's disease? I extracted DNA from 10 Alzheimer brains that came from the Harvard University Brain Bank. These are the Harvard brain DNA extracts in this tube. Using molecular methods, I was able to find the DNA of the spirochete, which causes Lyme disease, in 7 out of 10 of the Alzheimer brain specimens that we received from Harvard. That's incredible. The results of the experiment could not have been predicted in anybody's imagination when 7 Alzheimer brains gave me essentially the same thing, which is part spirochetal, part human, linked up in one molecule. I about fell off my chair. If my dream comes true someday, that will redefine the practice of medicine. That will redefine the lives of millions of people. Since spirochetes are the cause of neurodegenerative diseases and syphilis, could it be that this spirochetal infection, Lyme disease, is partly or wholly responsible for some of the neurologic degenerative diseases we face in this century? Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. Those are named conditions for which no cause is now known.
Here's one ALS-like sequence in chronic Lyme. A woman was diagnosed with ALS. Later on, they found out she had Lyme disease, started treating her, and she improved. By the way, ALS is not, the recovery is not good from ALS when you have Lyme. Joanne Whitaker said ALS was advanced Lyme symptoms. And there's one here on fetal death. This is a United States patent. We can show this one. This is fetal death where the woman, case of maternal fetal transmission of Borrelia burgdorferi, resulting in neonatal death has been reported. I mean, this is not new stuff. Borrelia burgdorferi in a newborn despite oral penicillin for Lyme during the woman's pregnancy. Baby was still born, but this was throughout her pregnancy. She was given a low dose of antibiotics. How did the baby get Lyme? How did the baby get bitten by a tick?
My name is Elise Brady Moe. I have chronic Lyme disease. 3 years ago, I was misdiagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis by my primary care physician because I had migrating joint pain. I never saw the tick, and I did not have a bullseye rash. Luckily, as my own health advocate, I did more research and I obtained a second opinion. 2.5 years ago, I was given a clinical diagnosis of Lyme disease from a doctor who understands tick-borne diseases and who uses a lab that is proficient in identifying the antibodies created by the Lyme bacteria. I was treated with 7 months of oral antibiotics before I decided it was safe to try and conceive a second child. We had intentionally postponed having a second child until we felt we had done our best to rid my body of this dangerous bacteria. I conceived our second child in March 2002 and entered the pregnancy feeling confident we would have a healthy child. The 15-week ultrasound showed a healthy baby with a strong heart, and all its organs were functioning normally. At 16 weeks, the remaining test results were all wonderful. At 18 weeks, I sensed something was wrong. My instinct was correct. Our baby boy was dead. While waiting for surgery the next morning, I came out of shock, and I began wondering about the Lyme disease. I had read that Lyme disease could cause miscarriage, but there was no evidence to prove it. I called my Lyme doctor and a lab skilled in detecting the bacteria so I could determine how to test the fetus and the placenta for the bacteria. I took the information to the hospital, and just before the surgery, I insisted that the OB obtain enough tissue for a separate PCR test for the Lyme bacteria. If I had not requested a PCR test at a specific lab, I would not know today what took our baby's life. 2 weeks later, my OB informed us that the baby boy was chromosomally normal, and the local lab did not find any bacterial or viral infections. that are tested for in a normal miscarriage. He had no explanation. Only 3% of miscarriages end at 18 weeks into a pregnancy. I needed an answer. I received that answer the next Monday when the OB called me to report that the fetus and the placenta were PCR positive for the Lyme bacteria. He concluded that the Lyme bacterial infection had caused the fetal demise. He actually thanked me for requesting the PCR test. We grieved all over again. How had this small bacteria survived 7 months of antibiotics and continued to destroy our lives? When I purchased a garden stone in memory of our baby boy, I promised myself that I would do everything in my power to help others avoid this tragedy. I am here today as part of that promise. The story continues. After the 18-week miscarriage, I began another regimen of antibiotics. I was on 3 different oral antibiotics for 6 months before conceiving our 3rd child. I stayed on Ceftin during the pregnancy to protect the fetus, but unfortunately, it did not survive past 9 weeks due to chromosomal problems. I requested a PCR test before the D&C, and the results were devastating. Again, the placental tissue was PCR positive for Lyme bacteria. What next? I did not want this disease to win. So I began a 4-month regimen of IV antibiotics. After the IV was pulled out, I continued with oral antibiotics, and luckily I conceived a 4th time in November of 2003. The bad news is I had another miscarriage this month, unfortunately from another chromosomal problem. The good news is the PCR test was negative. This does not mean I am rid of this bacteria, but it is a sign there is hope. Today I stand before you and I hope that there will be funding for more research into the testing and treatment of tick-borne diseases. I hope that your wife, your daughter, or your sister do not have to deal what we have dealt with during the past 3 years. I hope that you will help the future generations. It is time to help, not just hope. Thank you very much for your willingness to listen and your time today.
And here's one. This is from the Wayback Machine. I had to hunt to find this one. Multiple neurologic manifestations of Borrelia burgdorferi infection, Lyme and MS. People diagnosed with the chronic central nervous system disease can mimic multiple sclerosis, physical disorder, psychological disorders, and dementia. So here again, we have so much information, and I can't put it all online. So we're going to have, there's 2 websites you can go to. And I'm sorry I'm not having a good day today, but there's 2 websites you can go to. And one is the LymeConspiracy.net. The other is ctlymeriders.com. They will be on your TV screen. During the reward, you can take a look. You'll see on your screen a section where we talk about the $20,000 reward, which is now gone. I got tired of leaving the reward out there. You have to tie up 20 grand hoping somebody doesn't challenge you, because they couldn't win anyways. So I'd like to thank the people at SCTV who are helping set this up and work with me. And this is probably the last thing I'm going to do. I've tried everything. I was on True TV with Jesse Ventura in 2010. The show was censored and watered down, and then his show was canceled after that. It came on for 1 year, and it's been gone. So they've had a lot of problems with censorship. I was told Homeland Security and Congress censored the show. Just another thing, I think the main reason people get Lyme disease, the benefit to it, is death doesn't come as such a disappointment, because you're living in hell, you have no quality of life, and everybody's denying you even have a problem. You saw everything in this testing, and I have more. I mean, getting information on Lyme disease is like getting a drink from a fire hydrant. There's no limit to what you can dig up and what you can find. One other thing, why is it that a small town, Simsbury, Connecticut, can produce something like this. One person can pull up this information, put it together, and yet our news media doesn't, there's a blackout. Our news media won't even touch this. They won't even discuss it. I'm really amazed. I thought the $20,000 reward would get the media's attention, but no, they're not allowed to. We have a 10-minute presentation from a doctor at our 2004 hearing that our group put together with Richard Blumenthal. It's a 10-minute presentation on treatment failure, and it's all different doctors. So it's not just me saying this or one or two other people. And I'd like to know why band 31 and 34 were removed from the Lyme testing. Band 34 and 31, IgG, IgM, those show exposure to the Lyme bacteria. The CDC felt it necessary to remove them. That's a whole other story. They had a vaccine come down the line, and if I'm forced into something, I will cover the vaccine. I will come back with that. Otherwise, my health is poor, I'm done. But band 31 and 34 were removed from the testing, which shows exposure to the bacteria. Why isn't the Department of Justice investigating that? This just goes on, and it's free reign. These guys do whatever they want. Thank you, and I hope this helps somebody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.